It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Naresh is from Qualitest. Naresh, how you doing? You're one of my
Good.
favorite people to talk to and collaborate with. Qualitest is really a trusted partner of ours as well, and we have a great relationship. And Naresh gives us a lot of different ideas, so you'll get a lot out of his experience. Um, Let me give a quick introduction, my friend. So Naresh is leading the NextGen Data CoE at Qualitest. Naresh is focused on driving quality engineering and data modernization for customers across banking, finance services, and insurance, healthcare, life sciences, retail, energy, media, and technology sectors. Naresh also specialized in consultation and delivery of next-gen capabilities such as DevOps, PDM, intelligent test data, automated test assurance, data monitoring and observability, data visualization, unified data governance, modern data architecture, data fabrication, data mesh, and data ops. With hands-on experience driving digital transformation, large-scale implementations, and designing highly scalable and resilient hybrid multi-cloud on-prem solutions, Naresh carries strong domain expertise in healthcare, consumer banking, lending, and financial services. So what I've just read is you don't have much to do, Naresh.
I know that's a lot. I think it's just, in a simply put, I'm a data citizen. That's
Yeah.
how I simply put it.
So I'll
Uh,
turn it over to you. Look forward to your presentation.
sure. Thank you. Hope you hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and the audience here. So today I'm going to talk about data modernization, primarily in the context of quality engineering and quality assurance. So I'm going to touch base few things on the modernization to start with, and then migration, automation, and some of the best practices that we have seen and we have been suggesting to implement across the customers as well. Very first thing I wanted to start to lay the land, right? So some of these has been there for a while. You might have seen it, you might have faced it in your own experience as well. Each of them are, touching different points of the customer journey, right? When you look at the very first one, it's talking about, okay, we're building this new software, Kubernetes, microservices, DevOps pipelines. All of this is good, which is great. I think fundamentally the challenges that we see is the underlying data. We all know that data is under current, which runs irrespective of the software or hardware that you deal with, right? So we see a gap in that place where data is not modernized, but the layer on top is modernized. So we all understand the implication of that. The other aspect I wanted to bring it up is, okay, we've done this many times, we've done the innovations, but I think my data is too complex. It has grown tremendously. I just don't know where to start, right? So that's another paradigm that we've observed across. The third one is essentially, we had traditional databases, traditional applications like web apps, mobile applications. We have now social media, IoT, smart devices. There is a lot of data proliferation is happening, right? So what it is doing, it's not stopping you, right? Business are demanded to collect more data, learn more about their customers, behaviors, interests, etc. But how are you able to do it with something which is built on legacy architectures and legacy data platforms, right? So business demands more agility today. And the very famous one that you all heard, the garbage in, garbage out. I think we keep using the same data, which is not cleansed, quality, complete, reliable, all of that. But we understand the output it would be, right? If you don't give the right input, the output would be as good as your data as well, which is something that, again, we constantly see it across, irrespective of whether they are on the cloud, on-prem, hybrid, etc. Right? Depending on the level of maturity the customers are seeing it. At the very center, it's about, I think we've heard in the previous sessions as well, it's all acknowledged that data is an asset for organizations. I think if you don't handle it well, I think it's not just about losing the revenue. I think now we can see it's going to be causing new issues as well. For example, whether it is a data breaches, whether it is unrealized revenue, whether it is the risks that they are facing, internal risks or external risks. So there's so much of necessity to handle this data with much more care, with the new set of data coming in every day. So as I said earlier, this is the quick agenda I wanted to touch base. Before I talk about the testing, I think it's fundamentally you need to understand what are these aspects and how it's all rolls up to the automation, how it needs to be applied in the data quality space, right? So you all have seen or read different definitions of the modernization. The way we see it is essentially fundamentally changing the way how organizations treat the data, perceive the data, right? Like we talked about, data is an asset. Okay, it's not just an asset from a data point of view. It's an asset for you to use it for the rightful insights that you wanted to get from your data, and use it for uh, generating new revenues, generating new avenues for the businesses to expand in this macro economy that we are now with, right? And how do I do it, right? It's all about not just the technology, right? It's fundamentally having the people and the stakeholders onboarded in this journey together, and at the same time leverage the technology, right? Like 2 decades ago we didn't have a cloud. Now we have a cloud services. Now we have, today we're talking about generative AI. So I think there's constant evolution of these technologies, and putting some of the technology in use, especially on the data, is going to yield much more value to your business, and increase the trust and confidence that is essentially required, right? So why again modernization, right? We've seen it, we've heard it. These are some of the numbers, right? Those are the facts that analysts that have been talking about. While there is a tremendous growth has been there for the last 2 years, a lot of customers moving into the cloud, public cloud, SaaS clouds. There's still, it's mind-boggling to think about. 60% of organizations are still using some set of data on-prem, which what it means, it still put them under a lot of pressure to scale, to be agile to the modern needs, and there is an increased cost, right? So whether it is a storage cost, infrastructure cost, maintenance cost, there's still this increased operational cost that's been a burden for the organizations. The other thing to keep, closely think about this is the breaches as well, right? So how easy it is for you to apply a patch to your data, whether it is a vulnerability, whether it is attack or cyber attack, ransomware. How easy it is for you to quickly respond to those breaches or even prevent those breaches, right? So it's proven that it's going to be a lot time taking, a lot expensive to do it, especially on the legacy, on-prem, wherever your data is kept, right? There's more to it, not just from a security aspect of it. It's about how much value that you can get. Just imagine you have an on-prem architecture which is always rigid, and so much of data is being duplicated from different sources, different platforms. So the likelihood of getting a quick value is always questionable, right? So now if you start using most of the data what you already have, and then start producing that in a more qualitative manner to your business analytics and business insights, you can start generating new revenue, right, for the companies who don't do it. It's just going to be a lot of unrealized value with the gold lot of data that they still have at their hands today. So where do we start, right? I think it's always starts with the cloud migration, right? It's not about Azure side of the world, or AWS or Google's. They all have a lot of powerful capabilities, a lot of new evolutions, especially in the data warehouses, data lakes, and lake houses and all, right? So I think the key aspect is to start the journey by migrating the data, right? Otherwise it's just limited to whatever you could do within infrastructure, within your solutions that you have on your legacy systems. So what kind of approaches that we've seen? I think you all have read different R's, like re-platform, re-hosting, re-architect, redesign. I think it all comes down to three, right? Whether it is are you doing a lift and shift, meaning taking the data from your on-prem, putting it on the cloud, or you are doing some sort of a refactoring, meaning making some code changes, fine-tuning some data structural changes, schema changes. That could be another aspect, or fundamentally redesigning the whole thing, whether you are replacing an existing schema, existing database to a brand new, for example, to SQL to NoSQL, or just going from traditional databases to a cloud data warehouse. So there is three different patterns that we typically see from a migration approaches perspective. They all have, as you can see, there's a level of impact for each of them, right? So if you do a lift and shift, probably there is less of infrastructure code changes, but there's a higher impact on your data. When you move the data, even though it's copy as is, there's always incompatibility. For example, the varchar on SQL Server with its maximum length may not be the same on Aurora MySQL, right? So there are some always the discrepancies and incompatibilities that you probably deal with. And then as your data is moving in, very traditionally we move the data over the network. There's always some bandwidth slowness. Whatever updates that you have on your on-prem, they're not up to date on your cloud. So you will always see some inconsistencies between what you have in your legacy systems on the cloud as well. So there's always some sort of data loss that happens and corruption that happens because of the incompatibilities, the size of the data, length of the data, type of the data you're moving, etc. Right. So what is needed is essentially handle with care, essentially on the data side, irrespective of whichever approach that you take. Yeah. So what are the key things which are needed, right? So before even getting into the components, I think fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves is, do you know your data, right? Often when we do the migrations, what happens is we plan it, we execute it, and the middle of the planning or middle of the execution, we identify that, hey, I missed certain data set, I missed certain application. Why is it so, right? So there's fundamentally lack of understanding about their data, right? Where is my data present? Is it on the files? Is it on the shared drives? Is it on the databases? Is it on the backups? What kind of retention policies I have? So there's so much of unknown questions, right? I think it's very critical to first answer those questions, right? So as you can see, each of those questions are aligned to set of engineering components and the assurance as well, right? The way we look at this is it's not about engineering and assurance as in separate. I think they both hand in hand, go hand in hand, right? As you're building some of these pipelines, some of these data migration scripts, you have to critically acknowledge that there is a need for assurance as an integral part of it, right? So if you migrate the data and then you do a traditional approach to, okay, now let's do the testing, which is sometimes is too late. Whether it is the risks that may be already unaddressed, right? Okay, I have a risks from a compliance perspective, risks from a business SLA's perspective, KPIs perspective, or what kind of access I'm actually dealing with. Now, moving from on-prem to cloud could be a lot more different for somebody who are heavily regulated, like banking, healthcare, life sciences. They deal with a lot of regulations. So there's always uncertainty about how this data is going to be moved on the cloud. Am I going to maintain the same encryptions, same anonymizations, same tokenization, sophistication. So there is so many things that goes on, right? So it's very critical to have an assurance as in separate solution, meaning within the same framework that we are recommending to include, right? The next set of questions to ask yourself is, okay, what it means from a security, privacy, and compliance perspective. Okay, am I under GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA? So what kind of regulations that falls under? Am I still meeting those regulations, moving this data from on-prem to the cloud? What kind of data loss, data consents that I'm still being criticized under. So whatever consent orders or data consents that your customers have shared on prem, it's automatically transferred to the cloud as well. So whatever you had built, some of those things on prem, they all have to be one way shape or other, they have to be applied on your cloud as well. Third one is, how quickly you can become operational, right? That's one question always challenging to the business. Whenever we talk about data migration, oh my god, no, it's going to take a long time. I can't afford to have any downtime, because if I lose one day, I'm going to lose 10% of the customers. So how can we make it more effective? How can we make it quickly operational, right? With a limited data downtime, and with limited outage to their daily operations. So it's very critical for us to think about some of those questions as well, as we move this data to the new world, such as cloud. The fourth one is, okay, now we know the platform where we want to move to, and we understand we have to build some ton pipelines, and we have to make sure we're able to get a real insights from the data. Okay, what tools do you use? What we see often is a lot of solutions that are built for the migration, they are like a one-time use. Okay, let's just build some data migration scripts, let's just build some SQL validations, right? I think that pattern need to change. It's all because a lot of those solutions are becoming like a one stop, and they have a shorter shelf life, and businesses are heavily budget constrained to not to have that kind of a wastage, right? How can we think about building something with a good amount of reusability, right? Which I'm going to talk about later how it can happen. The very last question to ask is all about the trust, right? Can my business still do the same thing whatever they're doing on the cloud? Is my data is going to change the way it's going to be uh, you know broadcasted or shared? Can I still use the same reports, same application that I'm using today to get the real insights about how I'm doing from a business day-to-day standpoint? And the other hand, what kind of a data quality issues that I have, right? Moving, what happens if you don't tackle those data quality issues? You might have on-prem, and if you don't tackle them as you migrate, it's moving the problem one place to other, and it just becomes worse, especially on the cloud. If you don't handle it with care, you will have a lot of compute issues, a lot of storage issues. So that's where there is a myth that, oh, okay, cloud is expensive. No, cloud is not expensive. Cloud is cost affordable if you do it in the right way, right? So that's where it is very critical to consider a lot of these components as you are thinking about doing migration, right? On the right hand side, as I talked about earlier, the assurance aspect of it, right? What kind of risks that I have from a KPIs, SLAs perspective, downtimes perspective? What kind of a regulations I am under? Is my data still safe? Is my data still secure? Just imagine the customer situation, right? Me as a customer, I would be thinking, oh my God, now my data is on the public cloud. What is it going to happen with, right? So it's important for us to build that trust with the customer. So make sure that even though I'm moving this data one place to other, it just makes sure that just the security of the data and privacy of the data is rather increased, if not stay the same. And quality of the data, right? So we all heard about accuracy of the data, completeness of the data, how can I use the data for whatever purpose it is intended for, right? So it's very critical to inject some of those data quality principles, not just as in data testing, right? So what we've seen typically is just doing data testing. Okay, let me just do the checks about the counts. So let me check the minimum values, maximum values. I think they're good, but I think we know with the modern data, it's beyond that, right? So it's not just about a statistical way of comparison, right? So every data record is different. If you deal with the SaaS applications, it's even the problem becomes even harder for you to do the data quality checks. So important to embed some of those data quality principles within the data assurance practice. The fourth one I want to talk about is the performance monitoring, right? So it's critical to establish what kind of SLAs that I have. Am I able to finish this whole pipeline process within the same duration and time how I was able to do it in on-prem? Are there any challenges that I have if I don't publish the data to my downstream system? What kind of a ripple effect it will have on the downstream, right? It is very critical to understand from a performance perspective, whether it is a load time, the SLAs, um, and how quickly you have to abide with some of those internal contracts that you might have, or you might be sharing some of this data to external, right? For example, we're working with a life sciences customer, so they do a drug discovery. They get tons of data from the external agencies into their systems, and if they don't receive the data in one day, you can just imagine how much of the productivity loss that you would see across all the researchers, data scientists who've been waiting for this data to come in, but they don't have it. It just becomes a lot more challenging. So it's critical to understand those performance metrics, as you think about migration. Test data management, it's a unique flavor to think about. What happens in our traditional world is we take a sample data, we put it on the new system, we test it, right? And there's also a question about, okay, is your system is ready? Don't you think it's too early for you to put the data on the new system because it's not fully vetted out and tested, right? So you can address some of those questions by introducing something like a test data principles, like whether it is synthetic data, fake data, or a virtual copy of the data. Just test your new system using some fake data. At least vet out some of those connections, integration issues, and how you're able to query the data, access the data, right? Some of those issues that you can easily tackle by bringing test data management also into this equation. From a analytics and report testing perspective, right? So we know there is BI reports, there is dashboard that you probably have created. To the point earlier, okay, just because my data is migrated, there is a very acceptable expectation from the business that my reports still should be should still the same. But why are you still having differences, right? In their mind they think, hey, it's just the same data, you copied from one database to other database, why am I seeing differences, right? It could be maybe some of the reference data is disrupted, right? You have a transactional data which is successfully migrated, but your reference data is no longer have a connectivity, right? Or some of your aggregations are at toss because not all the transactions are not moved properly, right? So when you're transitioning from, let's say, from a traditional databases to something like a warehouse, the way data is stored, modeled, it's all different, right? So it's very critical to make sure as you test the data itself, how the consuming applications, whether it is reports or dashboards, are they functioning well or not, right? That's one of the key aspect. The last one I want to touch base is on the observability aspect, right? So we all know data migration is not just a one-time effort, right? So many times you will see that I do an incremental loads, I do a dress rehearsals, or I do delta loads, right? So as you do this, I don't think you need to build one-time solutions. Rather, build something which you can use it as a recurring basis and start observing, right? So if you already know that there is set of files is going to come and you're going to do these multiple iterations of this, so build some sort of a monitoring capability to capture those issues, right? As you get the data from your on-prem, let's say, into AWS S3 or Azure Data Lake, right? So as soon as something lands there, build something like a Lambda function. So it triggers the data validations right in place. So you don't have to wait for that file to go into the warehouse and then getting into the BA reports, right? We all talked about doing a shift left testing. So what does shift left testing means? It's about ability to early detect these issues, right? Again, we know if you don't detect those issues, the cost of fixing it is 100 times more than what you can fix it as early as in the pipeline. So important to build some of those observability techniques and monitoring techniques which have been there all around. Like you've all heard about site reliability engineering, observability from application perspective. I think it's very important for us to bring some of those best practices and principles into the data side as well. Yeah. So we all talked about engineering and assurance and a lot of components, all of that, right? So how do they all come into picture, right? So first thing, we know that there's a pre-migration, there is a migration, and post-migration. uh, Before that, there is a fundamentally something to think about. What is your migration strategy, right? It's not just about picking a cloud platform and moving data. What is your organization goals? Do you want it to move to Snowflake, AWS, or Databricks? Okay, for what? Why did you pick those platforms? Is it satisfying your regulatory compliance and controls that you have? Is it satisfying the data, not what you have in the past, right? What you actually projecting in future, right? So are you going to be dealing with more unstructured data or structured data? I think it's very critical to address some of those questions as you do the first migration, build the migration strategy. Then we talk about pre-migration. Okay, now that we know the objective, we know the scope, then we talk about collecting some baseline. Okay, how good is my data on-prem, and what kind of issues that I have from a data quality perspective, what kind of risks that my business has if I don't do it right, right? So some of those things are to be analyzed and baked in as you plan for this, right? So few things that I mentioned earlier, that don't build the one time solutions, right? As you do the migrations, think of something like a data discovery, right? It's something very powerful. It's unfortunately less utilized, even though we do have ubiquitous amount of data that we are dealing with today, right? So let's say you have something like a data discovery you built to understand your data tech stack, data assets on your on-prem. Use the same solution for on-prem as on the cloud as well. So it's not need not be only for the migration. So as and when you're getting new data, your businesses are producing new data from different sources, internal or external sources, you can use that same mechanism to keep learning as the data is coming in daily. So that way you have a rich some of these reusable frameworks and solutions which can be used post migration as well. Yeah. And think about the data lineage is another common challenge that we see. Okay, I moved this system, but somehow suddenly my other system is broken because I didn't know that there is a dependency, right? Why is it so? Because you probably don't have a good understanding about the relationship between the data, right? Unfortunately, the current databases, unfortunately, they're designed to capture the relationships within the databases, right? It's even more difficult even if you go with an NoSQL, right? If you just take a simple example of relational databases, we know the relationships. Okay, I know it, but the moment you go out of one database or one file, then you have to lay upon some of these solutions which are out there, which will provide the relationship between the data. So if you know that, then you can think about, okay, can I do this database migration? Okay, if I do this, what other applications that I have to migrate as well, right? So it's very critical to understand the relationship between the data and the across the systems. And the quality rules, right? So these are something we've heard, and there's a lot of tools out there, solutions out there, which help you to define the rules, right? I think what we're talking about is yes, okay, do you already have some, right? So it's not like this is the first time you're doing the data quality testing, right? If you probably have some of these rules already defined, right? So they may not be just talking about completeness of the data, or whether uniqueness of the data, right? So there's a lot of some business rules that goes behind it, right? If I have a database, or if I have a table or a column where it's supposed to have a value between certain range, is this how it is stored, right? So some of those rules are very much important to be baked in as you are building these migration pipelines to move the data from one place to other, right? On the other side, I mentioned about data assurance, right? So uh, it's important for us to keep thinking about test strategy as well, right? So the one classic problem that we always come across is there's a lot of planning, a lot of effort goes in doing the pre-migration and migration, and unfortunately the quality engineers are actually brought in very late in the game, right? So I was working with one of the retail customer based out of Texas. So they had a plan to do the enterprise ERP migration. So they all planned for it. They have, but we come to know that the data testing is required. We were onboarded like very late in the game, like we have only a month to go to do the all validation. So it was too late, and then after we looked at the system as an outside in, we found a bunch of issues, right? It's not just about the scope of the data. So we had so many unknowns. For example, what is my data quality in the existing system? I don't know what kind of regulations you are under. We think we are under some GDPR and some CCPA, but we're not sure. And who owns this data? So there is some of this data is owned, some of this data is a shared responsibility, right? So there's so much of issues which are beyond technology that we found, right? So which was very critical. That's where it is very critical to inject some of these data assurance principles as early as you are planning. So create a test strategy along with your migration strategy, so you know how you're going to validate. Is it going to be incremental? Are you going to move the entire data together? How are you going to migrate it? So all of those details to be known and questioned as you are planning. Other thing to highlight, right, from a privacy and compliance perspective, today there is very poor job done in many cases. That most of the cases that we see that, okay, I just need responsibility to make sure that there are 1,000 records here, there are 1,000 records there, right? I think that's fine, but I think what about the risk? What about the privacy and compliance aspects of it, right? So we know the encryption works differently based on how what kind of a database you have used, what kind of a Unicode that the data is stored under. So some of these things will change between on-prem to the cloud, or even just from different databases. Doesn't matter whether it is the cloud or not. So it's very critical to test some of those aspects as well, not just from a data quality perspective. So that's where we strongly recommend to be aware of the privacy and compliance regulations, and make sure there are certain checks and balances are there for that as well too, right? And anomaly detection is another thing. Again, this is not a new practice, right? It's always been there, and data scientists always does it. But I think that is it is very critical to bring some of that much earlier, as you're thinking about doing this migration or modernization as well. With more advanced generative AI and things that we have now, it's easier to generate some of those rules intelligently by looking at the data and looking at the patterns in your data. For example, we see that length of the data in a column is actually truncated. Right now, if you're dealing with 1,000 tables and 10,000 columns, it's not manually possible for you to check every single column, right? uh, that's one of the issues that we do the surface testing, right? Okay, counts are matching, records are matching, and there's no nulls. I think that's all good, but I think there is something beyond. These are the issues which usually uncovered later after you push your code to production, and then you start seeing your business and customers will start seeing some of their data is lost, or they're still putting older information of the customer. One example is a customer had updated his mailing address, and when they did the migration, so they still updated the older records as the migration was happening. There were no sync between the old system and new system, so they were keep sending these letters, penalty and fine letters to a customer. This is in a banking situation, and a customer says, "I never received it," and that went into a legal action where then they had to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to figure out why it has happened. Right? It's not just the time lost; it's about the trust again with the customer, and also amount of marketing and other costs that you also imply on that on top of it as well, right? So use some of those AI based techniques to uncover some of these issues which cannot be manually validated. Uh, so this is essentially, as engineering and assurance framework, they all coming together as the data is moving across your data pipelines, right? We're not talking about whether it is a data warehouse or data lakes or lake houses. I think doesn't matter. I think the underlying principle is to have quality guardrails in place across your data migration journey. So what solutions are there, right? What we have been doing? So there is a traditional automation that you do, again, from a data construct perspective. Like I said earlier, you do profiling. Okay, you get a statistical values, you do a comparison. Do I have the same number of records in both source and target? Which is not always the case. Sometimes if you do a re-engineering, especially, the number of records in your source systems may not be the same in your target systems. So there's a lot of schema changes. So it's one-to-one comparison is almost like 10% or 20% of the scenarios only it will work, right? So that's unfortunately how the current validations are there. And what we're doing, so we compare, the stare and compare, right? So we pick the data from one system, pick the data other system, put it in a spreadsheet, write a macro, and then do the validations, right? Yes, it is an automation, but is this really to the level and scale that it can deal with when you're talking about hundreds and millions of data? We have capabilities to generate the test. Okay, I can generate the test for standard tests again, right? So it's all based on, okay, check the nulls, check the duplicates, check the blanks, check whether a record is present in certain systems. So these are very standard checks which a lot of tools in the market does decent job, but I think, are they really and dynamic to generate based on different data that they're dealing with, right? Just because it's not always source to target will have the same structure, same number of records. So you will have a SQL to NoSQL, you have a structured data in your source systems, and when you look at MongoDB, everything is document databases, key value pairs. So it's very difficult for you to write test or even generate the test. So that's where we need to use some of the Gen AI capabilities to generate those tests for you, so you don't, it reduces the amount of time for you to manually codify those test cases, right? And then the other key thing I wanted to highlight is on the automation side, right? So we do automation. Okay, I have done the automation for SQL Server, Oracle, or DB2, or MySQL. But can you use some of those for other areas, right? So that's where we wanted to make sure whatever automation that we have done, it's not just only for one database or one application. So build those framework which are reusable, irrespective of the platform that you have or you're going to move into. Yeah. And the last one is about the observability that we talked about, where start looking at the data drift, right? So as you move the data, what changes are there? So I have done my first migration, so you have a good sense of how your data is going to be. There's fair bit of validations already done, so you already have a sense of how the data comes in. So start using some of these observability techniques where do the monitoring, look at the trends. Okay, am I supposed to get the data from this source? What format it comes in? Does it aligns to the structure it is defined? So start applying some of those observability principles in this place, right? Which will have a tremendous value, right? The observability is again there, but again it's only look from production data monitoring, right? But what about non-production? So that's where a lot of issues are need to be uncovered, and a lot of movements happen in the lower environments that in production. So it's very critical for us to start having some of those observability principles applied in the non-production as well. One last point I want to cover is again on the aspects of, okay, how can I do it? Should I do it on the pipelines, or should I do it as a separate tools? It's kind of yes and no. It depends upon what kind of a data you're dealing with. If you have access to connect to the data, if you have sort of like a real time data validations is required, and through the pipelines, it's always the best practice to, as you move the data, put a validation control in place, like I said earlier as an example. Okay, as you know, a file is coming in, do the validations, make sure it is right for it to go to the next stage, right? So have those guardrails present in every single step of that pipeline, so you can uncover the amount of defect leakage that goes later into the pipeline, right? So that's one other thing I wanted to call out. Oh, okay, so we talked about data a lot, and I also mentioned in one of the slides where whether it is a lift and shift, whether it is a refactor, re-engineering. So there is not just about data, right? Sometimes when you move the data, your applications also may be impacted, your infrastructure may be also impacted. So make sure you look into these aspects as well. Is my new platform is performing just the way how it was before? I'm able to quickly raise an incident when something goes wrong. So have those some of those integrations, and the infrastructure components are working intact as the data moves along. That's one other thing I wanted to talk about. On the other thing is on the app side as well. So if you're re-engineering it, most likely you're building microservices, Kubernetes applications, or building a brand new pipelines, etc. Right? So it's critical for us to take a look at the app and infrastructure side of things as well. Lastly, again, lot talked about of technology aspect. I think it's very key to understand some of these are people, process, and culture aspect as well too, right? So make sure you upskill your people to understand what kind of a data they're dealing with, and both technology and business teams are appraised on the milestones, objectives, what is going to change, what is not going to change, right? So be bold and be open to educate both technology and business on both sides to make sure they both are on the same page, to deliver that ultimate data product that they all envisioning to do it, right? And adopt some of these modern technologies I mentioned about, whether it is moving to the cloud, using the cloud native services, or even generative AI. Some of those aspects would help a lot from a technology aspect, taking beyond the steps of writing SQL scripts manually, doing the validations manually, what kind of a data quality checks that I have to perform. So it's important to embrace some of those AML based technologies to uplift the way we validate and we test in the system. Lastly, on the cultural aspect, it's all about the ownership. I think there's a saying, everybody is responsible for the data. I mean, of course, everybody is responsible for the data, but somebody has to own it, right? Otherwise, it goes into the same situation. If there is a whenever there is a dual ownership, then there is a loss of responsibility, right? So it's very critical to identify who owns the responsibility from whether it is a data migration or modernization perspective, and how quickly we can collaborate, and what kind of solutions that we can start exploring it, right? Start with small. There was also another question, hey, where do I start with my data migration journey, right? I think it's all goes back to what's your ultimate goal, objectives, and what's your enterprise data strategy is about as well, right? So I've seen example where one of our customers who moved the data into Redshift, and then they decided, okay, no, I should go to Snowflake. Then when we looked at it, it's not because the platform is not supporting, it's just the enterprise data strategy has changed, and they had few other integration issues which had made them to go into another platform, right? So there's a lot of operational and cost loss in that aspect as well. So make sure think about beyond technology when we talk about migration or modernization. Okay, that's all. If I have now, so thank you. I think the two quotes tells them all. I really love them. I think one of them is talking about, you start your journey. Other one is talking about it is a journey. It's not just about I have migrated the data to the cloud. Okay, am I good? Probably not. So which is where it's I think it's mentioned in previous discussions as well. It's a journey. I think it start with a migration, and then start building the solution, start embracing some of the services which are offered on the cloud as well, and you can always complement with some of the third party tools, market source tools, to fill some of the gaps that are there from a data quality engineering and assurance perspective. Okay, with that, I'll leave the floor open for any questions.
Hey, Naresh, thanks a lot. Great presentation, a lot of good insights. Knowledge is quite incredible in terms of quite a number of things. I have a question for you, and that is, how do you overcome the objection of cost, especially when you're having to run dual environments for a period of time as you go from on-prem to the cloud?
Yep. So it might look like an early investment, right, to an extent, where I might have to maintain both the systems. But I think the way to look at this strategically over the period of 3 years and 5 years, what is the additional value that you're going to get as well? So also to be counted, right? Yes, it might look like I have to maintain two different systems initially, but when you look at it, okay, am I going to save from a storage and compute and speed of response, right? Some of those things would always come into play as well. So thinking about this more strategically will always make sense versus thinking about what's a transaction. Okay, I'm moving this data from one place to other. Now I have to spend more, right? So I think the value is beyond the migration.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you're looking at it in a year, it's a bad decision, right? If you look at it over the course of 5 years and where it's going to take you, it's a completely different decision. It sounds like.
Yep.
I had another question. I think we have time for one more question. Uh, what workloads are being moved mostly to the cloud? Is it production apps? Is it the analytics workloads, or some other workloads?
So it's pretty much when we look at different customers, it's everywhere. So there is a traditional application modernization happening, and there is a SaaS adoption also is happening as well. So we've seen. I have my own homegrown GL systems which I've built. Now we've seen customers going into SAPs and Oracle side of the world as well. So that's also a cloud as well too. When we talk about cloud, it's not just the top three public clouds. We see the transition is happening, modernization is happening on going into these SaaS-based products as well.
Mhm.
And on the analytics side is where we see a lot more, right? So we all know that data warehouses have been traditionally used for analytics, but there has been limited in terms of the scale, the kind of analysis we want to do it, right? So with the cloud, whether it is Microsoft Fabric or Google BigQuery, they are offering much more scalability. Some of the compute hungry algorithms that data scientists run upon, right? So we see a tremendous increase in the analytics space. a lot of data warehouses which they have been kept on-prem, moving into Snowflakes, Databricks, Redshift, and BigQuery side of the world.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much for being such a good partner with Data Gaps and Qualitest, but also accepting the invitation and participating in the Trusted Data Summit. Greatly appreciated.